That would be, that's our. Yep. Hey, Scott.
We got this. Return. Yeah, we have returned.
Would you want me to start now?
Good. I think so. Machine there. All right. Well, good evening. My name is Matt Koffroth, Assistant District Manager for the Lancaster County Conservation District. I want to welcome you to the public meeting for the Chiques Creek PL 566 plan. A number of you may remember back in 2022. That's when it was July. We had a kickoff meeting for this particular project. This is the follow-up to that. Some of the designs that were actually put together by our consultants. So we're going to go through some of the ideas and some of the scope of this particular project here tonight. This is meant to be a public comment period. I would ask though that you did sign in when you came in. So this is a public meeting, so we have a record of that. There's also some folks online too. So if you have a comment, just kind of speak up so everybody can hear that online and we can engage that question and answer that appropriately. Okay. And we're taking questions throughout, or do we want to wait to the very end?
Let's take them throughout.
We'll take
If there's
them
something
throughout.
we're gonna cover later, we may say, hold that, we have it covered later, but we'd rather get them when they're on top of your mind.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome.
Good evening, everyone. So kind of our agenda for tonight is, I want to go over some of the logistics, the people online, especially in metal, or Chris will cover that in a minute.
Introduce yourself.
I will. Okay, thanks. I'm Bob Hujak, with RGH Consultants. I'm the project manager for the consultant team. Working with NRCS and Matt's group to move this project along. We do have a formal introduction of the people here on a slide coming up with names. Give you some overview of what we're trying to do. This is a little bit of a different type of project where we're not trying to go out and find something to actually go build today. We're trying to look at a study to see if these options make sense for the watershed to go into more of a programmatic approach down the road at NRCS. So it's kind of the first planning phase of a larger planning phase before there's a project involved. So I know everybody wants to see things get built, but it takes a while to get these things done. So this is the first phase of a couple phases of planning. Kind of give you an overview of what we've done and where we're going and what some of our next steps are. So some of the stuff we've covered at a pretty high level. If you have questions, feel free to bring them up. We want to give you the information and get your feedback on if you think this is going to be a good thing for your watershed. Talk about logistics. You're running it.
Yeah, just making sure that everyone who's here signed in. The online attendees, if you wouldn't mind, please sending your name, address, email and phone to the meeting chat. That's what's on our sign-in sheet here. The chat function is enabled and being monitored. So I will be bringing the chats to the attention of the presenters as they come in. And I guess outstanding ones will be addressed at the end. That's all I have there.
And I guess if you're not hearing well enough, just either raise your hand or go in the chat box. We're trying to adjust the audio system as best we can. So just to let you know who's all involved with the project, I'll let NRCS as the lead federal agency, so I'll let you introduce you and your team.
Thank you. I guess I should be coming over so the people in the chat can hear. My name is Heather Smelts. I'm a civil engineer with NRCS. I'm currently the Assistant State Conservationist for Water Resources, in charge of our watershed and flood control operations program. A lot of words. We normally call it PL 566 just to shorten it because that's the authorization that funded everything. Super excited to be doing this project and partnering with the Conservation District. Met Matt earlier, and you know Matt generally, and the county commissioners as part of the project. With that, I'll turn it back over to you for the consultant
Okay.
team.
So I already introduced myself as the lead consultant team. Chris LeClaire is actually doing most of the work. He's a technical group behind it. We also team with another firm, WSP. Gaz is here to talk about some of the more the design, some of the work on the environmental side. We're more the project management team. And then we also work with local water science institutes, Joe Sweeney and his team, because they have a lot of work in the watershed. And they've been a kind of consulting, providing us advice and doing reviews just to help basically ground truth. Some of us don't, none of us that don't live in the basin, but some of the local concerns. you know, why we're here, like, as Matt said, there's two public meetings. We had one a couple of years ago to get feedback on scoping, we call it, of what you cared about, what we should be looking at as we look to deal with legacy sediment issues. And we consider those. We want to show you the progress that we've made and some of the alternatives that we've come up with. And really, the main thing is to get input from the public and the various agencies that might be involved to see if you think we're on the right track, give us your input as to how we may move this program forward. So, you know, we're talking about our progress, get into the review of alternatives. Again, recognize that we have alternatives for particular areas in the watershed. Those are things we looked at and try to figure out where those might be useful. We're not saying we're doing this project on this particular property. That's not the intent of this, but we'll go through some explanation of how we got to the areas that we looked at specifically, but it's not intended to be a project for this particular location. And then discuss how we're thinking of going forward with recommending this through NRCS to go really go get more project funding to move this into more of a implementation phase of the project where we actually do work to improve the watershed. And obviously want to get your input on these things. Heather mentioned it, we're here because of the Watershed Flood Prevention Act. We know there's been a long-term interest here in dealing with these legacy sediments that erode and create water quality issues in your basin and basins downstream. We want to do our best to reduce what's happening in that figure there where we get erosion and all this material that's been collected over 100+ years gets moved downstream with all the phosphorus and nitrogen and other things that are in there that have damaging effects to the watershed. So you'll live here, but if we're looking at the whole Chiques Creek Basin, it's about 120 square miles, so it's a lot of area to look at. There's 3 sub-basins, the Little Chiques main drainage, the Lower Chiques, the Upper Chiques, really focusing on the stream corridor. All of our work looked at just the stream corridors. And we attempted to look at projects throughout the basin, and we're all explaining some of the screening process we've been through to kind of figure out how to study different project sites, but trying to get representation of the basin as best we could. So it's really the stream corridors and the repairing areas we're focusing on with this particular project. How do we improve that to really reduce what's being removed out of the basin down here, ultimately to reduce the discharges from the basin that get to the next major water body. So some project background. The land use varies. It's mostly agriculture, but there is some urban development. There's not a lot of heavy forested lands in the basin. There were historically many mill dams present that trapped a lot of the sediment. Some of those have been removed, some haven't, but the legacy sediments are primarily results of those dams blocking flows, slowing their creeks down and dropping the sediment behind them. As a result, now the streams are trying to erode down through those sediments, and as they have current flows and you don't have adequate vegetation protection area, you get erosion, which then creates suspended sediment that gets carried downstream. And those sediments, because of all the agriculture, are pretty heavy with mostly phosphorus, some nitrogen, and that's water quality issues downstream. In some cases, like I said, that picture there shows the mill dam where you kind of disconnect the stream, so the water's coming down, it slows down, drops sediment, water keeps going downstream. Now, when they get removed, that terrace is left, and some of these terraces are very large. It just gets eroded as the current geomorphology continues and starts to erode those. The goal is to get a reduction of 40% of sediment removal from this basin to meet the target loads. That's a pretty tall order, but that's the ultimate goal. We're trying to get enough participation to get a reduction in 40% of the sediment coming out of the basin, which would be a tremendous improvement to the basin if we do accomplish that. So the planning process, we're in planning, and I'd say we're almost on a pre-planning phase because we're trying to do studies throughout the basin to plan and say, do these projects make sense technically, environmentally, economically? And if the answer to that question is yes, and we're sure we believe it is yes, then we would look to see how does NRCS go in for funding and Matt look for funding to actually move these projects into more of and I'll call it a planning design phase. The next phase is actually start looking at particular areas where there's interest from the project owners and the sponsor NRCS to actually implement projects. So we're in planning, we've collected a lot of data in the watershed. We looked at what are the natural resources, what's here, what's good, what's bad. The goal here was to get 10 representative evaluation units, and basically evaluation units for this study was considered one particular property parcel as identified by the county planning. That's how we looked at that. And there was no magical number for 10. It just felt it was a manageable amount to do with funding, the time we had for this project. And then we would collect specific data from those 10 units and then look at what are various treatment methods for each unit, and then pick one and develop one to look at what the cost might be and what it might look like. And so the goal was to get different areas of the basin in different conditions so we can evaluate a range of all alternatives. Then get to what the benefit cost ratio is for the various alternatives, and try to, at the end, we've tried to extrapolate that to a basin-wide approach. That's the big picture of what we're trying to accomplish. In the next phase, we get more into specific projects that may go into design and then into construction. And, you know, this project likely would not be a bunch of sites, a bunch of units in design and in construction, and maybe smaller chunks as we get interest. So that design and construction is going to probably be somewhat concurrent over a decade maybe or more. Yeah, so. So our scope of work was to collect data, do evaluations, look at the resources involved, go through a screening process and selection of representative units to look at, collect some field data, and develop treatment concepts, which is what we've pretty much have been working on. We'll brief you on that, and then really the purpose here is to talk about going forward with a full watershed program where we need a lot of input, hopefully. So data collection, evaluation. So the first thing we did, and this work was done mostly by our sub-consultant WSI, is we basically looked at using LiDAR or published topographic mapping we had from 2014 and 2019. So we had a 5-year period where we basically looked at the mapping and developed a database. What was there, like 22,000 or some different units in the basin? So all these different parts of property, we tried to get a database and look at some key things like how much terrace material might be out there, what's the volume of sediment. So this figure here, those pink areas are what we looked at in topography as being sediments, was where the ground is relatively flat horizontally until we get to changes in topography. From a planning purpose, we called those for our sediment terraces. Look at the volume. We said, well, it's probably at least as deep as a stream channel. So we use that depth to get an approximate volume for each particular property parcel or unit in the basin. And then we looked at between the 5-year period, we looked at erosion rates. So the red lines on there are changes between the 2014 and 2019 topography. And so we looked at where we were seeing erosion and then did a volume calculation, looking at how much volume was there in 14 versus 19, and that became what eroded. And then we prorated that to an annual erosion rate to get something to put in the database. So we looked at the annual rate of erosion. Then other factors we thought could be important. We looked at vegetation density. Is it a healthy treat area? Is it pasture fields? What are some major categories for land use? Looked at where the mill dams were to see how that might affect what's happening with the volume or the erosion rate. They really looked at the stream size or stream flows. I mean, in an upper basin part where it's considered a stream number 1, or a larger stream, there's more flow. So try to see what differences there were based on areas of the basin and where the stream segment was relative to the watershed and how much flow it was receiving. So all this data was aggregated in a big spreadsheet to do some searches to try to get down from several thousand different units to a manageable size that we can study in this kind of pre-planning program. So what we did is we had the meeting a couple years ago, and we heard some of the things, and the slide that shows us what you guys cared about, what we thought we cared about, to try to prioritize what's more important than others and try to incorporate those priorities into our various alternatives. Again, every priority can't be incorporated because, you know, you never get a project done, but the goal was to get the main things that seem to be consensus among the public and the agencies that are the most important for implementing a project. And so this was the chart we had, we kind of ranked, and I'm gonna go through all of these, but if you were here last time, we gave you a list and said, you know, how much do you care about, let's say, water quality? Is that, you know, you care a lot, you're kind of neutral, or you don't care much at all? And from that meeting, we kind of did some numerical rating of giving, you know, high likely 10 points, not likely a few points, and did some mathematics to see how they would shake out with different ratings. Basically, if you look, there's kind of dividing lines at the top. There's like the top 20% really is, you can really care about floodplains, water quality, having good riparian areas, support for fish and wildlife, and just improving the water resources. A lot of the rest of these wetlands, critical habitat, those are kind of covered above, but for the most part, we looked at projects that would reduce the amount of erosion, that would improve water quality, and try to establish riparian areas that would promote native species and native growth of plant and aquatic life. And so we looked at these resources, and then we try to prioritize them based on this list. Again, nothing really ranked too low, but we tried to focus on the top, you know, 20% of where most people said these are the most important things to us. So how do we evaluate and screen all these? So we started with 1,700 actual property, call them evaluation units. We have 1,700 different properties. We basically screened them to only look at ones that were about 1,000 feet long, thinking that much less than that, it's a project's not really feasible or wouldn't do much for the watershed. So we look first to say, you know, which ones have the highest sediment volume. We looked at which ones have the highest erosion rates. What kind of vegetation was there, what kind of mill dams were there, what kind of stream size was there. I don't want to get into all the math. We gave some of these like a 50% value and a 20%, did some sensitivities to see, are we still seeing the same group pop to the top? And so from that, we basically identified 55 that seemed to be the ones that had the biggest sediment volumes, the highest erosion rates, and provided some diversity across the watershed, both in terms of location, stream number 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then with the sensitivity, they kept generally popping in the upper, you know, upper 50 or 60. So then we said, well, that's still quite a bit. We got to get down to 10. So then we looked at getting to 35, and we looked at those and looked at the math and looked at just regionally to get spatial distribution across the watershed. But with 35 sites that had, you know, various stream sizes, various vegetation types, densities, in different locations. So we got the 35. And then from those 35, we reached out to all those property owners with the goal of getting at least 10 that we can go out there and actually do some field sampling on. And we did get 10 property owners that allowed us to go out on their properties. It was in, I think, winter, early spring of 23 to go out there and collect some of the samples to getting the data we needed to do some of the analysis. So a lot of our work is based on details we collected from these 10 different evaluation units. Any questions on how we got down to the 10 we studied? That's a lot of information. That was like a year's worth of work that I covered in like 10 minutes. So any questions? And all that will be ultimately when we do the written documents, the Plan EA, that process will be documented to explain it in a lot more detail if you care to read that. So they went out in the field, several people out in the field, and basically we wanted to figure out, so what is the sediment? What's it look? Is it sand, clay? What is it? We wanted to characterize it in terms of what's its constituents, in terms of chemical content, phosphorus content. Do we have any concerns with other contaminants that might be heavy metals or things that could be a concern? So we took some samples, we got some laboratory tests done. We walked the site to kind of confirm if we thought the topography, the math we used for our desktop study made sense. Did some field ground truthing on those, kind of measured depth of groundwater where we could, try to use the hand augers to get through the sediment and confirm the volume to get better confirmation on a volume, what was out there. Had biologists look at the habitat and where we thought there were wetlands and what type of wetlands, document the site conditions. Looked at what was happening in the stream. Does the erosion we were seeing match the aerial photography? How do we field truth our office data? We talked to landowners and said, hey, how does the stream perform? What do you know? And many landowners gave us some good history on what happened on their property, and that was helpful in our consideration. Like I said, then we did some laboratory testing to evaluate what was there. So what we found was that it was basically a fine grain material, mostly fine sand, or clay with sand. So it's not sands and gravels, it's not really sticky fat clay. It's a pretty lean clay. You put it in your hand, you can hold it in the ball, but it's not really sticky clay. So that was predominant, was there very little bit, but not dramatically. We looked at, the concentration, mostly of nitrogen and phosphorus. That was needed to really evaluate the benefit. Part of our evaluation is if we're reducing erosion or removing the sediment, how much are reducing those are the two key contaminants of concern, how much we're reducing that being discharged out of the basin. And then we wanted to check to see if we had anything that would consider this to be kind of hazardous material, because if we're removing the sediment, we have to go put it somewhere and get properties that would accept it. We wanted to just confirm that there was no consistent issues with petroleum hydrocarbons or heavy metals or things that would preclude removing this material, and we didn't find any of that. So considered it meets requirements for a clean fill. Well, the samples we tested, there's a possibility something in the basin could be different, but it's not highly likely given the source of material. We had a pretty good diversity. So that's the data we had for this study, and that bottom line of being clean fill was important in getting our costs for doing the work, because it's a big difference whether you can take material and excavate it and deal with it as a clean fill, or if you got to put it into a hazardous waste facility. So now I'm going to turn it over to Gaz. Her and her team did a lot of the work on the treatment concepts and what we looked at to try to evaluate how do we fix the issues.
Hello, everyone. So we looked at a variety of different treatment concepts. The first one that we considered when we looked at an EU was the removal of the sediment and restoring the site. This type of preferred alternative is best when there's relatively moderate to significantly high legacy sediment accumulation, and if the high flows can create these vertical banks. Additionally, a poor quality of existing habitat where it could be improved if we remove that sediment and reconnect the land with the floodplain. Also, a consideration was just good construction access, where we're not going to damage the environmental features of the area and that we could get to the site. So on the following slide is just an example of this type of activity where this removal of the sediment terrace allows a reconnection to the stream and to the corridor here. And this also, as you can see, impacts large areas. So this is a large land and earthwork type alternative, but it does yield a reestablished floodplain and a lot of benefits. So our next option for land treatment is to stabilize that sediment in place. This is best when most of the erosion on the site occurs in localized sections of the banks where high flows are causing erosion and head cut, but it's not on a large swatch of the corridor. The stream corridor itself may be confined, which limits the sediment removal through it, whether it's through its geomorphology or the slopes. And the relatively high quality of existing habitat and the construction access would deter us from wanting to do a lot of earthwork there. We don't want to tear it up and impact the high quality of existing habitat. So this is one where we wouldn't try to remove a whole bunch of sediment. We would just try to stabilize it in place. These examples here just show you these pictures here show you examples of that as well. You can see how the unstable banks can be stabilized, preventing that erosion from moving the sediment downstream. So our next option is to reforest and reinstall that riparian buffer. This is favorable for your sites where the riparian buffer is primarily pasture or grassland. Your groundwater is relatively high so that it can sustain that vegetation through the year, as well as hydric soils. And the riparian root buffer is what stabilizes that sediment in place, preventing it from moving downstream. So in this alternative, where this is all that's done, you'll see that there's no initial benefit from removing a whole bunch of sediment, but it does prevent the long-term continual contribution from that site to the watershed. This is just an example of a reforested and restored corridor of a stream using this approach. So we also looked at historic dam, mill dam removal. Some of the qualitative conditions were that there's still an intact mill dam on site. And those dams generally tend to accumulate that sediment, and then during large storm events, they'll release that sediment downstream. On sites where there's a partially intact or breached mill dam, you'll find that that sediment is consistently getting flushed downstream because there's no dam in place, but there is likely a significant amount of sediment that's accumulated behind that structure. We did not find evidence of intact or breached historic mill structures in our site investigations in our EUs, but watershed mapping does show some EUs are located near historic mill dams, but they were likely breached or removed. So the last alternative is to do nothing. That is beneficial when the stream is healthy. It has minimal erosion. There's threatened or endangered species on site. We don't want to impact them. Construction access is limited where we would tear apart the environment there, and we could potentially damage high quality habitat or wetlands. So intervention is not preferred on a site where we choose to do nothing. There is one EU where we chose that alternative, and it was because we observed quality habitat and wetlands, potential threatened and endangered species were on site, and there was minimal erosion observed. So there's also the opportunity to combine approaches. So some sites lend themselves to the benefits of multiple land treatment concepts. So for example, in this image here, you see this corridor has significant erosion. There might be an opportunity to reconnect to the floodplain. You could also reestablish a riparian buffer. So in some cases, multiple approaches could be beneficial. Any questions before I move on from those? We'll go through those. All right, so this is a summary of how we categorize the potential benefit for each of the EUs by looking at the legacy sediment treated. It's important to note for the do nothing, there is a value here. It's not actually legacy sediment that we're treating when doing nothing. We're treating the potential for future contribution into the watershed. So I don't want to confuse anyone there, but you can see how with some of these EUs, we have a significant amount of sediment that's being treated. And in EU1, for example, that sediment is being removed. I wanted to just touch upon that because that is going to drive costs. You'll see how these numbers tend to impact the cost directly. This example over here just shows a sketch, a conceptual sketch of how the bench could be reestablished, reconnecting a riparian buffer to the floodplain where there was previously a sediment bench in that hatching right there. So I believe, all right. We looked at the benefit cost analysis of these land treatment concepts. There were some that were quantifiable and some that are not as quantifiable, but we've tried to capture them in our narratives as well as in our analysis. So of course, there's the cost to install and construct the project, as well as mitigating any impacts and control resource impacts that may occur. But the benefits that we're trying to capture include the sediment and nutrient removal, of course, as it pertains to the downstream watersheds, as well as reduction of land lost. So some of those properties may be losing land to the stream and actually losing acreage. So this would help protect those homeowners' properties, and also the restoration of floodplains and wetlands. There's also these ones at the bottom here. They lend themselves more towards those non-quantifiable benefits, but ones that the folks in the watershed and those would probably benefit from. So that's obviously the habitat restoration for your environmental species, but there's recreational benefits and regulating of the water temperature, which could impact other things you're doing in the water. There's also studies that show that restoring wetlands, riparian buffers contribute to carbon sequestration, so climate mitigation, climate change mitigation. And of course, improving access for the residents to their waterways and being able to maintain their properties without having to have those eroded steep slopes and no access. So the benefit cost summary. When we look at this as a whole, you'll notice that there are some that don't come in quite as high. And that's why I pointed out those high volumes of sediment that we'd be removing for those sites. So the haul cost for EU1 is about 3 million, half the cost of construction. There's also, in conjunction with that, there was low concentrations of nutrients and other things. So the benefit was less there. But there are other projects where the benefit is greater. And the purpose of this study was to look at the overall watershed and create an average that was reflective of the watershed as a whole. So each one of these sites doesn't necessarily indicate a future project. So I don't want there to be a confusion that there's a project that's only going to give you 0.26. That wasn't really the intent of the study. It's more to have a full picture of the watershed and to come up with an average of an above 1 that would actually gain benefit to the communities overall, looking at the watershed as a whole. So I think from here, I'm going to turn it over to Heather.
So the whole purpose of this study, because we're government, right? Nothing is ever simple with government. It's a very transparent process to set everything up and to justify the expenditure of taxpayer dollars. Because there's money that went into the study, but if the government provides funding for this project, it's going to be significant funding. So we need to be very clear, very transparent, and justify those dollars. So that's why the process takes so long. It's very open. And we take lots of public input as we're working through it, because it's your taxpayer dollars in mind that could be spent on this type of work. So you saw how we worked down in the process from the 1,700 parcels to the 55 potential sites to the 35 to the 10 to figure out what to do. And based on some of that work, and then coming back in after the fact and taking the proposals that were developed and very preliminary site plans back to the landowners, we said, hey, would you be interested in something like this on your property? And some said yes, some said no, some said, well, maybe if I don't have to pay for it. And some said, yeah, especially if I don't have to pay for it. And some said, no, even if I don't have to pay for it. So based on all those numbers, we're estimating roughly that maybe we could impact 5 to 10% of potential stream miles, or that's kind of the number that we're working with that might be interested in doing some type of program with us. And that's all based on the initial screenings. So what are we going to do? What could we do? You can see on the chart in front of you the potential stream miles in the watershed and this is that we would say maybe do nothing on. That there's maybe 50 to 70 miles in the watershed that are probably okay. We're looking at ranges for repairing buffer installation. So basically going from here to here is taking that percentage at 5 to 10% of the 50 to 70 to get down. So we're looking at maybe about 20 miles of stream length within the watershed that we could potentially do something on, or that might have interest to do something as part of the project. And there's some flexibility, and you'll notice there's some ranges because each site's gonna be a little different. No site is the same. As Gaz had mentioned, you might be treating one with the sediment removal and the buffer installation, or stabilization in buffers, or things along those lines. So it's a very fluid type thing. You can't just pinpoint and say, oh, we are going to do this here, because it doesn't quite work that way. So what does this mean? So what we are doing is that based on the work completed, NRCS believes that these projects could have a positive impact to the watershed to address legacy sediment treatment. we glossed over it at the very beginning. Because we kind of talked about a little bit more for this, for the scoping portions of it. But for these projects, for the watershed and flood prevention operations program projects, it's a partnership between NRCS and the local sponsor. NRCS can't do anything without the local sponsor and without an ask from the local sponsor. So I could say, hey, we have all this and we can do all this. But if the conservation district and the commissioners say, okay, thank you for this information, we're good. The project stops. And that's a possibility, but the point of, I don't know if it's good better not be a good possibility, but I'm teasing. But the point of this meeting is basically when it comes down to it, NRCS is making a recommendation to the sponsors that say, we believe these types of projects are good for your watershed. We believe that putting money towards these types of projects would be good for your watershed. Would you partner in with us to do it? So one of the points of this meeting tonight is that this is the public's opportunity to inform your county leadership to say, yes, we totally agree. Well, maybe we agree, but maybe you should look at something else, or no, we don't think we should be spending taxpayer dollars in this way. So NRCS is making a recommendation that the County Conservation District and the commissioners move forward with a program to provide technical, so that's funding for the design and construct, and then the financial assistance for construction to treat legacy sediment within the watershed. So everything that Bob and Gaz showed you basically are working together to say, yes, it has a positive benefit cost ratio. It's good environmentally. There are no major red flags that we're seeing from threatened endangered species or from cultural resources or things like that can't be major red flags that can't be overcome through the process. So we are making this recommendation to them. Now, that's pretty vague, right? Let's do this. How are we going to spend this money? How much money are we asking for? How long is this going to take? What does this look like? What does it look like implemented? So what we are proposing and what the district and NRCS is working through is fleshing out the administrative side of what this would look like. It'd be co-administered by the two agencies. And we'd be looking at providing funding for only those who are treating legacy sediment. Right now, we're guessing. So you're hearing me say guess. You're also seeing the question mark right here. Roughly 10 million, providing $10 million towards it. We could potentially ask for more. This is also part of the public parts. You could come in and say, well, hey, that's way too much. Or hey, that's not nearly enough. We know all these other places that we could really use some of that funding for. So that's sort of the other parts of the public information that we're looking to gather from you too. So I'm like leaning on the chair and getting all cozy. But to do it, so for each of the sites or for any potential project, it would work through the normal NRCS planning process. And to do that, we would be looking at it would also need to meet NRCS standards and specifications. And we'd be looking to implement at least one of these primary conservation practices for that site to be eligible. And it's basically our full gamut of stream bank type work. So if you're come to us and say, hey, we want to do cover crop, sorry, this program's not for you. But if you want to do something stream wise, we can potentially do that. Some might say, well, hey, I have cattle. Well, fencing and things along those lines and stream crossings right now are considered secondary practices. So we could include those as long as we have at least one primary practice that we're working through. So we're not looking to exclude anyone, but we're focusing on working to address that legacy sediment. That's the primary goal of the project. We're also working to try, so let me back up. If you've worked with NRCS at all in the past, and you've worked with any of our EQIP program, our environmental quality incentive program, it's all based on an incentive payment. the rates for these projects are the same rates as what we would follow through with the equip incentive payments. When we ran the numbers based on, so Gaz and her team did a cost estimate of what they thought the project would cost to construct. We ran the payment information and what we thought NRCS could pay for towards it. We came out with about 75 to 90% incentive payment for construction. And some of those are a little higher, some are a little lower, but that's sort of where we're working out. So that's what NRCS can offer. Now the question comes, where does the other part of it come from? Because remember, those landowners, like, sure, you can do whatever you want on my property as long as I don't have to pay for it, right? Because they're, I mean, maybe some will would be willing to pay for some, but probably not. So that's part of what we're working at, trying to figure out, but we're still getting a pretty good number at 75 to 90% of these construction costs. Can it come from grants? It can certainly come anywhere as long as it's a non-federal source is the biggest type thing. So I wanted to point that out. Are there any questions? I thought I had seen a hand go up in the back. Did you have a question or? Okay. Good. I like when I do that. So the other thing about this, the big thing about this is it's voluntary. Everything NRCS does is voluntary. We're non-regulatory. So we're not going to walk onto a site and say, you have to do this. There's going to be an application process, either from the landowner or the project owner. Right now, the applicants can be private, they can be a business, they can be an NGO, unit of government. If there's a park that wants work done, that could possibly be a project. So it's very wide open as long as it's not federal land. We can work on any property as long as it's not federal. The current land use I mentioned doesn't really matter too much, but we are looking for at least 1,000 feet of stream length. Maybe landowners work together and ideally whoever the site would have control on both sides of the stream bank, but some of that would hopefully get fleshed out in the application ranking process. I did mention at the very beginning that we are looking to go through the site-specific NRCS planning process. So even though we're doing this big master project that says there shouldn't be any environmental issues, we're going to follow NEPA, we're going to address all the cultural resources, we're doing all that at this big watershed level. Each project is still going to have to individually go through that. We're still going to be doing the checking for the teeny species. We're still going to be coordinating with SHPO if we need to for the cultural resources. We're still going to be getting all the applicable permits that need to be done to be able to do this type of work. The other thing too is that we are going to be requiring that each site be tested, have the sediment tested. We think we're okay. We're not expecting problems, but that's just due diligence. Make sure we're okay that way. Right now, NRCS and the district are trying to work through and figure out, at least if the district decides to take this project on with us, the design work, how's that getting done? We're still working through some of that. And that's why we're looking to say maybe some of the simpler projects we do in-house and the rest get farmed out to some better subject matter experts. We will need land rights because we're not going to spend all this money and have no guarantees. And then there's also discussions about, well, who provides the long-term operation and maintenance? Because NRCS can't do that. And I don't think the district wants to take on that responsibility. No. The district and NRCS are talking about who's providing the quality assurance during construction, make sure it gets installed right. So these are things that we don't have answers to yet, but we're working toward fleshing out as we walk through this process. So the next steps. The sponsors decide on the programmatic alternative. That's, do they want to move forward with a project to put a funding pool of money to address legacy sediment with NRCS? Or would they rather do something else? Or would they rather not do anything at all? So that needs to happen. So that's where you get to inform the county and the conservation district. Yes, this is good. No, we have different ideas, things along those lines. It's your turn. It's your chance to inform them. Then we finalize the programmatic plan, which basically walks through everything we did, presents the results, justifies the project. We prepare a draft plan environmental assessment, which goes through a public comment period as well. Remember, I said we're federal. We're federal. It's a very deliberate process. We finalize the alternative after that public comment period, prepare the final draft. It goes through a technical review from the National Water Management Center for NRCS, as well as a programmatic review. It goes through another, we respond to the comments that came in through the public comment period. And then at that point, is that when we make that request of authorization for that $10 million or however much it ends up being, do we make that request for funding? So this is, yes, sir, sorry.
Trying to understand the sequence. Previous slide, you showed the implementation, the required application process and the county conservation. Vetting was to be sure that they fit the goals
Yes.
of the program. And then the next slide was this watershed planning. So which happens first?
Okay, very good question. Which comes first? The implementing the plan or the finishing the watershed planning? So, right, so as part of the watershed planning, we need to have a really good idea of how we're going to actually run the program. Right now, this is our best bet or our best guess as to how we're going to run that program if we get funding authorized for it. So remember at the beginning when I started talking, I said that the district always has a choice, or the sponsors have a choice if they want to move forward. We can get through this authorization and have an allowance of funding set aside. But if the district decides not to ask for that funding, it's going to sit until they're ready to move. So these are the next steps to finish this phase that we're in right now. The implementing the plan would be the next phase and what that next phase could look like. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Sort of kind of, you're going to allocate the funds before you know if you have volunteers.
Yes. Yes. We are allocating the funds before we know if we have volunteers, yes. Because we can't go soliciting for volunteers without having a funding pot sitting there. Yeah. Jamie, did you have a question?
I do have a question, Heather. The planning work that's already been done, the ground truthing or the investigations, are those, is there an inventory of projects already? And are these volunteers going to be sought from within that pool of candidate sites, or is this something different?
So, when we went on to those 10 sites, those 10 evaluation units, they were purely data collection only. It was explained to them that there's no commitment from them to do anything. There's no commitment from us to take action if they would apply. And that's one of the things that we didn't discuss is that, and one of the things that we're also trying to work out is there needs to be some kind of ranking process for which types of projects get funded. Because if I go all the way back, if this parcel, this evaluation unit would apply for do nothing, and we think the best thing for them is do nothing, we're probably not going to be doing any kind of work on their property because it wouldn't make sense based on their site conditions. So if one of these would walk through the door, we would be ecstatic because we have so much work already done for them. But there's no guarantees that they're going to. There's no promises on their side that they're going to. It was more just to try and get a representation of the watershed and what could be done and what might be appropriate to be done based on stream order, based on the land use around it, based on the vegetative cover and things like that. So this was purely a data-driven study And then at that point, we would be looking to the sponsor to Matt, as well as anyone else who's interested to help. We're basically gonna be offering a pot of money if they're interested in doing things. And we know there are projects in the watershed that are potentially just waiting for funding. We just have not done any of that work to identify them because so much has been done in the past. Yes, Alton?
You said that it's equipped rates.
Mhm.
The process with contracting like equip, that individual EU would have a contract with NRCS.
We're still working that out, because there's two different ways of doing it. There's one that NRCS would administer the contract, and there's one that the district would administer the contract. And we haven't even gotten that far down that path as to which way it would go. Now, let me back up and get to that pick, because there is, so one of the reasons for looking at these types of work and these types of projects through the PL 566 program is it doesn't have many of the limitations to it that EQIP does. For example, there's no payment cap right now for PL 566 for this type of project as compared to EQIP. If we would be looking straight up EQIP, each applicant or each landowner would be limited to about $450,000. Which for some of these would be fine, but for others is a drop in the bucket. So that was one of the reasons for looking and using this program for it because of that. We are still limited to the equip payment rates, but when I ran the numbers, they're coming out a lot better than I was expecting. Cause I'm like, when I ran them, I'm like, what's gonna happen? And then I'm like, it came out to the other side. Do we really want to pay that much? And I shouldn't say it like that, but it's one of those where do you get landowner buy-in and how do you get maintenance and stuff like that? Or if you give someone something and they have no buy-in on it, what's going to look like after the next major storm? So where's that line? And those are things that we're kind of wrestling and battling with to try and make sure that we can get a quality project in that's going to be maintained in the long term. Did I answer your question?
Long-term data that shows the resilience of some of the kinds of primary practices involved impose like removal of legacy sediment. Are those stable, say, for a generation? Are there data for something?
Joe, how stable is a Big Spring Run?
Very happy to take anyone out there who was just visited and see what 10 years long this project will look like.
So, no, that's 10 years. That's not 50, 100 thing.
13 since we installed.
Okay. So,
That's inspiring. That tells you that these kind of practices installed in the Chiques Street would hold their value for a decade or 2 decades in the face of crisis storms. They'll increase the value.
yeah,
When we looked at the design, what we looked at was providing, whether it was widening it or protection, that we have a defined channel for more routine flows. But then we were able to pass like 100-year type storm event with velocities that would be appropriate for the vegetation. So in reality, it'd be good for storm events. You know, 100-year storm can occur tomorrow, but in general, we're designing to that type of general urban design criteria. So the intent is to have longevity with the solution.
and it also strongly depends on using the right treatment method on the right sites. That's where it ultimately comes down to, because there's been work that's been done where if you're coming in and just rip wrap lining something on some of these banks, it could get washed out real quick, even though it's theoretically sized right, but it gets washed out real quick on the next major storm. So it does take, it's just as much of an art as a science to make sure that the right thing is done at the right spot. Yes, sir.
If you get NRCS funding, what's the selection criteria and what's that process look like? Is it on a first come, first served basis? It looked like the EU were ranked by cubic yards of sediment. Is it a sediment driven? Are you looking at nitrogen? Or are you looking at habitat breach?
So for the folks online, the question was that ranking criteria look like? And how are we gonna pick which sites get done? Is it first come, first serve, or is it based on some other site characteristic? Is that a fair, yeah. We know minimum criteria right now. Anything comes in less than 1,000 feet, we're not doing it. Stream length, sorry, stream length.
Sure, that be the laying down riprap or?
No.
Be the legacy sediment removal.
Just 1,000 feet of stream length. That's the first. It needs to be at least 1,000 feet of stream length. Beyond that, it's going to be, we have not figured that part of the project out yet, complete honesty. There will be screening done though. I can tell you that because we have a bunch of, NRCS does have other projects, or I'm sorry, other programs that could be applicable, that if something doesn't quite fit. So that do nothing project, because it didn't have it didn't have major erosion issues and it had really nice habitat. We might look to try and direct more toward our wetland reserve program, something along those lines, which isn't this one, but it would still be something to help and benefit that site and benefit the watershed as a whole. We know that my mind just went blank, I apologize. We know that we have some major discussions to do to figure out that prioritization and ranking. And a lot of that, some of that's going to come back to, I hope I don't make you sick as I'm doing this. Some of what we heard from the public meeting and the public input that we've got. So if it's a critical thing to you to prioritize good habitat versus sediment removal or nutrient removal, that's something we need to hear, because we haven't fleshed out those rankings yet.
Will that be a part of this deliverable?
Yes.
process?
That doesn't mean it can't get changed or modified as we go through, but that is one of the items that we're looking at. We need to have something in place to move forward, a plan in place to move forward. Joe?
Heather, how much is Chesapeake Bay funding going to factor into the selection process as opposed to more qualitative ecosystem services kind of benefits? It's going to affect cost.
Yeah, I know exactly, because if you could get credits for it, you now have a source to help pay for it. I don't know. And I'm not gonna, I would love to say, oh yeah, it's not, because in it's an ideal world and everything's gonna be hunky, but I don't know.
Easements, is
Yes,
there a financial payment associated with that easement, like be it through a WRE program or something like that?
we're not sure. Because we don't know if it's gonna be permanent easement yet. We don't know if it's just gonna be a temporary easement yet. And some of that made, like, what's going through my head, so this is just going through my head, this is not official, but it may depend on the potential cost of the project. And is it just at construction access for now? Or is it long-term permanent easement? It may depend on where it's at and what it's being used for. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but you're asking all the questions that, if you have ideas, we're happy to listen. Okay. Let me get back to where I was, because I was almost at the very end. So we talked, so we are planning on finishing everything up and having the planning completed, requesting that authorization of funding next summer. That's where we're at right now. So we're in our second public meeting. The draft document should hopefully be ready by this fall, this winter, that we can go through the review process and get them out and get them publicly available. We do have all this information on or at least we have the public scoping meeting. We will have this meeting's information on the NRCS website, as well as these presentations, and that's where you're going to find those public documents as well, once they're developed and ready for public comment. So, final thoughts. Remember that we're doing the planning phase. We're trying to make sure that we are being good stewards of your taxpayer dollars of a much bigger type project. The schedules and timelines are targets. If you have been at the meeting in 2022, you have seen that we were hoping that we would be completely wrapped up by now. So we're targets. We're looking at, I mean, we've been doing coordination, we've been reaching out, which is why we have a bunch of partners here. With local agencies, so, and the community as well. So we are happy to take comments, we're happy to take input to shape this into something that fits the community and fits your watershed. So, my contact information is here. Matt's contact information is here. If it's good, send it to me. If it's bad, send it to Matt. Yeah. No, I'm teasing.
Can I interject here? I mean, you've heard a lot of, we don't know, I don't know, we don't know, which is maybe concerning to you, but everybody should understand that PL 566 is initially was designed to build dams, correct?
Yeah.
So
It's
we are
flood
kind of
protection.
flipping the switch here a little bit because of all the legacy sediment issues that we have here in Lancaster County. NRCS wants to do this kind of initial phasing, kind of scoping work. So this is, I hate to use the word pilot, but it's almost like.
It is a
that
pilot
type of
program.
We're not gonna use that word, but it's something like that, okay? And that's why we don't have all the answers at this point, but NRCS sees the value in this. And we're trying to flip that switch, so to speak, from the dam building program to something that's removing dams and the effects of those dams. So I don't want everybody to feel like they don't know what the heck they're talking about. We do, it's just a matter of we're trying to create this as we go. That's why we need all of you and your public comments to kind of fill this in. Did I catch that properly?
You did a great job with that, yes.
So you need to convince.
Actually, his boss, some board of directors.
The commissioners have approved us going forward with this phase one, so they're aware of that, but as you know, they're elected officials and some of those elected officials, when they initiated this, are no longer there. So we need to continue to put this in front of their eyes. Myself, Allison, others have done that over the years, so this is just another piece in that puzzle.
And part of the reasoning for that and for the commissioners being on board is for the watershed operations program, the sponsors have certain requirements that they have to be able to do. And a lot of that stems back from the dam building days where they need to be a taxing authority to be able, a lot of times, at least when the dams were constructed, or other large scale flood control projects were done, the sponsors are responsible for operation and maintenance. So they need to show a funding stream to be able to pay for it. The sponsors needed at that point to have the ability to implement eminent domain. And that's
Scary piece that commissioners do not like.
right. And with this, remember I said that this was all voluntary. So we're not expecting that that's going to be an issue, because if a landowner doesn't want to do it, okay, we'll move on to someone that does. Which is a little different than with the flood control aspect of the watershed operations program, because it was in betterment for the community downstream if they needed to take land. So, but those requirements are still written in federal legislation. So that's why we had to bring I shouldn't say we had to, that's why we, it's a great.
That was the way I had a sweet talk with commissioners to get into this phase, because
Yeah.
they saw that eminent domain frame and they were very, very concerned, we'll be honest. So we will have to figure out a way around that, because once again, that is written into the law, that, but I'm not sure how we get around.
Well, they need to have the ability to do it.
Correct.
They don't
Okay,
have
I
to
would
do
say
it,
that.
correct. They don't ever have to do it,
Correct.
just like they need to have the ability to be a taxing authority.
Right.
They don't ever have to assess a tax to pay for these projects.
There's not, that's important, like you said, there's no assessment associated with these projects, this is federal money.
Correct,
Yes.
correct. Except for,
It's like, is there a public element, community at large needs to be on board? It seems like maybe not, it seems like you got applicants. You got the sponsor, and I don't know anything about the commissioners, but.
well, so the other part of that though is, remember, we're looking to be able to provide 75 to 90%. So where does the rest of that come from?
So we're gonna pass around the hat and all you're gonna put the first $1 million in, right?
Yeah.
So now that's why we need to find that non-federal matches with them.
And to what Joe was speaking about with the Chesapeake Bay crediting, if that finally does come into play, maybe that's a source of it. Maybe not, but
Let's make it term.
say that again?
Let's make it term.
Oh, yeah.
And not. Apply the presence.
You talked a little bit about the design elements and that the district and NRCS would be involved in that. And then mention a bit that there may be need to bring some others in with expertise. So what does that look like from a funding standpoint? Is there any funds that could go toward design, or does that have to come from a different source? If you're bringing like
Right.
someone else in to do the design.
So NRCS is looking and recommends that we fund this program for both the technical and the financial assistance.
Okay.
So when we request that $10 million of funding, or whatever that number will be, we're also going to be requesting an associated amount of technical assistance funding to either pay NRCS staff and or district staff and or private consultant to do that type of work.
When you talk about paying private consultants and when you talk about applicants, are applicants landowners? And who is contracting private consultants? NRCS is district or the landowners?
Would you like my favorite phrase for tonight?
I mean,
We don't know yet. Because ultimately, it's gonna probably end up depending on. There's a lot of things that could depend on that we haven't gotten worked out. For example, is NRCS holding the main pot of funding? If we run it like we run EQIP, NRCS will have a contract with that landowner. And then that landowner is responsible for finding the other cost share that NRCS isn't providing. Is that through a separate agreement with the district or a separate grant, or how? Because maybe the district has a pot of grant money that it could be used. And then typically when we do EQIP, the landowner is responsible for finding a designer if NRCS isn't, or the district isn't doing the work. However, we also do have a TSP program, a technical service provider program, that we could pay for some of that through that program. We just haven't gotten deep enough into it to evaluate, and maybe it's a little bit of all of it. We just haven't gotten there yet to figure out, well, how much is going to be going this way, how much is going to be going that way, and it may be site by site dependent. Are there any questions from the chat?
Nope.
Oh, I answered all the chat questions. Keep
There you
going.
go.
You started out by saying, someone started out by saying 40% is your goal. By doing the 5 to 10% of the stream miles in the Creek watershed, excluding the Bonneville Creek Park. which is
Right.
Also part of it.
I was waiting for someone to pick up on that one.
I'm there. So, can you achieve the 40% reduction by modeling, or is it 5 to 10% of the 40%?
So I think the 40% actually comes from the SRBC requirement, Jamie,
Not a requirement.
recommendation.
Yeah, so backstory on this, and we included the Donegal in that evaluation, was based on current sediment loads coming through the Chiques watershed system entirely, in comparison to watersheds. So further back, 99% of the stream miles 7 or 8 years ago, when we ran the analytics on this, were considered impaired for aquatic life. So that means that the macroinvertebrate community scores were depressed well below what would be considered a high functioning stream. In order to develop a total maximum daily load or a diet of pollution for the stream, or any similar feature, you had to figure out how sick is the patient and what would you need to do to get to a healthier patient. So we looked at a lot of watersheds. There aren't a lot of watersheds that are strictly comparable to Donegal Chickies or Little Chickies, just based on the intensity of agriculture, the legacy, land use issues, so on and so forth. But we did look at, a number of watersheds throughout the Chesapeake region that the commission and other partners, in the Bay program, collect monitoring data for long-term, pollution loads and trends for assessment of the Chesapeake Bay, overall. And we found streams that had, healthier aquatic life communities. And then we looked statistically at what are the concentrations or what are the loads of sediment in those watersheds versus here. And we did some science, some math, some dark art, whatever, but basically we came to a number that was an approach to a healthier system, and that essentially required a 40% reduction over what the loads are like now. Does that answer your question?
So there's.
So a lot of stuff has to be done throughout the watershed. I
This is
don't know
not,
what your math looks like, but I would be surprised that
this is not gonna be.
this is not gonna get 40%, you might get 5% of the 40%. Depends on how the money's allocated and how the projects play out.
And to touch back on Donegal. Cause yes, you're absolutely right. Donegal Creek down here is for the Chiques Creek watershed. However, as part of the pre-planning for this project, NRCS partnered with USGS to install a super stream gauge at Marietta to monitor, pre and hopefully post, as well as some of the other NRCS work that's going on in the watershed. I'm sorry? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why Donegal was left out. It's not like we didn't like it, but we didn't want to skew the data.
I think it's important, like if one were speaking to the public and starting a conversation, we need to, our goal is 40% reduction. Here's a program that's gonna allocate a bunch of money, commissioners on board, and fund the applicants. We're not going to get the policy. That's the second thing.
Correct.
It's another tool in the toolbox. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
There's a lot of funding coming to Lancaster, and this is another opportunity to get down. This is 5, there's maybe some funding for ACAP, another 5, maybe somewhere else for a municipal project, there's another 5, so it does add up.
I have a question about how weather plays an impact on measuring the success of these projects. Because what happens if one year it's kind of a drought and there's not a lot of rain, there might not be much sediment flowing downstream. Or another year there might be like a big storm event like in Nor'easter or monsoon.
So to my understanding, and Joe, you can correct me on this one, the majority of the sediment that you're seeing, a lot of it's coming from freeze thaw, just as much as the erosion coming through. Because the sediment itself does not have a real strong soil structure to it, so it doesn't hold itself together. So as it freezes, it sloughs off and then starts getting undercut. I'm sorry, as it freezes and thaws, it drops and then starts getting undercut and working its way that way. So you're seeing, so the summer thunderstorms and stuff like that and drought, I wouldn't expect to have as much of an effect as compared to those freeze thaws.
All correct on the physical side, Heather, but USGS adjusts for that over the course of the monitoring period. Okay, that's all calculated. The amount of moisture, precipitation that occurs over the course of a year, or 2 years, or 5 years, or 10 years is all integrated into the analysis that they do while they're collecting the data. So there is drought here. It's evened out over that 10-year period or whatever it is for monitoring. So for a 2-month period, it's evened out over that. So it's adjusted for on almost a monthly basis.
Oh, come on, I can't have answered everything, or give us ideas. What should we do differently? What should we be thinking about? What are your suggestions? besides pay 100%.
Another 10 million.
Another 10 million?
So I think I heard that you were around the idea of essentially annual payments or something. Also, in that same vein, that the property owner is responsible for operation and maintenance. Annual payments would go a long way in achieving that. operation. That would be a huge bridge. For a lot of
That's a really good suggestion. You're writing that down, right?
I'll build on that and ask, or any landscape out of production in terms of property, because again, and that kind of payment. For that lease or a certain period of time. I don't know the situation with
Yeah.
the places you're looking.
The sites that we looked at, Bob, I don't think we were planning, we were looking at taking land out of pasture. But I don't think we were looking at taking active crop land. Now, that doesn't mean it's not gonna be the case. And, loss of land was factored or is being factored into the economics to adjust. But that's a little bit different than potentially paying someone for their land being used for something else.
Adaptive management and monitoring go into these projects as, you know, one gets installed in a watershed and you go to the fifth project, and you're looking back at that first project and seeing how you can improve.
I would hope so. Absolutely. We'd also be looking to the stream monitoring too and saying, are we seeing a difference or is it taking a little bit longer? Is there a lag between doing something? But absolutely. And that's one of the benefits of trying to get to that. And I may have gone by it, but the slide that showed the planning, design, construction, and Bob had talked about, well, that design and construction may be going simultaneously throughout. So that's where that would come into play. Because we're not gonna just design all of them all at one time and then go build. It's gonna be as applicants come in the door.
It's unclear whether it's gonna be done by the district, you and the district and or third parties.
Correct. We're expecting that there's gonna be roles for all three of us. Because I'm not sure we have the technical know-how to do some of these more advanced sites ourselves. They're a little bit bigger than we probably want to bite off. So.
This, but as a pilot program, I presume this is going to be whole post restoration monitoring program that you guys have to document success or to document benefits, maybe with SRPC, Jamie, thank you. You know,
We've been monitoring here continuously since 2015 time, 2016. We're not going anywhere.
right, okay.
And that's also some of the reasons for the super gauge site too. I mean, now that's not individual site success and things like that. And I anticipate there would be follow-up after the fact, but we are looking to try and get some of those numerical values as well, that quantified data.
See some of those options up there. Especially the no, what was that, the no action?
Yep.
I bet my lunch that there's probably a strong baseline control there that hasn't dropped yet. So the minute PennDOT replaces that culvert or township, they're pursuant to DP something, a culvert, half a foot, you're gonna start seeing those items in. So is NRCS prepared to look at perhaps protecting them based on the control to make sure that that site stays in it?
I would say that that case needs to be made through the planning, through the site-specific planning process. And then as long as it's justifiable. But it needs to be, that's gonna be a case-by-case basis.
That would be based on an applicant coming to you and saying, I have this property and you're telling them you don't need to do anything. And that's part of that, that's what you would tell them to keep an eye on.
You could, yes,
You're
or,
not gonna go out and do this one through 10. May not apply.
correct, correct. Or if there's an applicant that's already working with someone and has a conceptual plan for what they may want to do, that's a little bit different than ours. Or what we would recommend, as long as they can make a good case for it and we can fit it into those conservation practices, it's something I would think we'd be able to entertain. Just to what you're saying, Justin.
And you have a lot of municipal folks here, they would want to put one of these projects potentially on your property, is there any, can they use that for municipal?
We have not put a stipulation on it yet that it cannot be used for MS4 crediting. I don't know that we were planning on going that way. The one area that does get a little funky that we have not really talked about, and I'm not sure which way it's gonna go, but I'm suspicious on the way it will go, would be about using these sites for wetland banks. And the potential using some of these sites for wetland banks. My suspicion, although the final determination hasn't been made yet, is probably not because of how much federal funds are already going to them.
That would be starting this process all over again.
Yeah. So, but that was a question that often comes up is, could we use this as a wetland bank? Or a stream banks?
But it's not gonna be MS4 credits, then sort of takes. And not everybody off the table.
You mean mitigation bank?
Yes, mitigation, yes, yes.
One total.
No, but you caught up real fast. You didn't, yeah. All right, well, thank you all. Appreciate the interest, appreciate the questions, appreciate the comments. You've given us a lot of good things to think about. You know, all the way to the end for our contact info, ooh, all the way to the end.
I'll click back
You
into
get
it.
me? Well,
Yep.
I did not, you know where we're at. You should have had my info from the letter of invite. And I can also pass things on to Matt. We have a deadline on here of July 31st, which is the end of the month. But if you can't meet that deadline, but are expecting to submit something, let us know. It's more, we just got to say something.
Not bringing the project just yet. Okay. This is just a comment period. Okay.
Well, thank you all. Oh, if you did not sign the sign-in sheet, please do so on your way out. Just so we can check the box that we actually had public at our public meeting. Or agencies or all that fun stuff. All right, thank you all folks online. Much appreciated.
They're gone.
Yeah.